We're live.
Pallavi. Check.
So hello everyone. It's Thursday night here in Mumbai, usually the night when most of the exhibitions open in Colaba, which is the gallery district of Mumbai. We at Project 88 are very pleased to welcome you to this preview of our exhibition, Not an Imitation. This exhibition is not in a physical gallery space, but in a virtual reality space, which we have specially created for this exhibition. It was exactly this time last year that the world went into an unprecedented global lockdown. Parts of the world today are still in lockdown, and while vaccines are being rolled out in others. Through the year and through many conversations with Rohini and Pallavi, and watching the digital avatars of many other art spaces, we tried to figure out what this time meant for us and our artists. As most art spaces closed shutters to the public and reappeared in slimmed down online versions, we started thinking of the virtual as an extension of the physical, and if they could work together. Is the virtual a substitute for the real? Could we have both physical shows and virtual shows in the future? And what roles would they play? These are some of the questions which we hope to address this evening, although I'm aware that it's still far too early to answer them adequately. I'm especially thrilled that this model of gallery and the preview can allow us to have so many of our artists from all over the world to join in, and that too in an expanded and larger space. So welcome to Neha and Sandeep from LA, Kojo and Angelika from London, Huma from Bristol, Munim from Berlin, Risham from Lahore, Shumon from Dhaka, Amitesh, Prajakta, Shreyash, Baptist, and Rupali and Prasad from Bombay, Jibesh and Shuddha, Himali and Sarnath from Delhi, Mahesh and Khageshwar from Calcutta. I think Anupam is somewhere in rural Bengal, and Gautam hopefully from Shantiniketan. It's been a secret dream to have everyone together under one roof, and this model has simply made it possible. The pandemic has made us all pause and think and recalibrate. And as a gallery, I would like to think of this moment as one which is alive with artistic agency, and one that is reinvigorated by artistic imagination. I will stop here. So over to you, Pallavi and Rohini.
Sabiha, could you, yeah. The last few months, we have seen the saturation of life with the language of time, soaked fully through by descriptions of a before and after, a durée provoked by pestilence, nostalgia, collectivity, and isolation. Much is sprouting, even more is withering. When nothing happens, anything can occur. The spin is no longer outside. Globally, the last year has been laden with a sense of displacement and loss. While for many, this loss has been personal or even individual, for those who have not experienced immediate bereavement, loss has taken on other connotations. Primary amongst these is the feeling of the loss of the real, exiled not from home, but from the world. It is this strange experience that both unsettles, but also produces a nostalgic view of what life was before in the real world. We are surrounded by nostalgic recountings of our immediate past, or shorthand for social contact, physical proximity, or normal life. The real now seems more to a time gone by. This nostalgia and its relationship to history, and by extension our contemporary, needs some careful attention. Svetlana Boym, in her book, The Future of Nostalgia, described nostalgia thus. The word nostalgia comes from two Greek roots, nostos meaning return home, and algia or longing, a longing for a home that no longer exists or has never existed. Nostalgia is a sentiment of loss and displacement, but it is also a romance with one's own fantasy. A cinematic image of nostalgia is a double exposure, or a superimposition of two images, of home and abroad, of past and present, of dream and everyday life. The moment we try to force it into a single image, it breaks the frame or burns the surface. Boym's provocative use of cinematic terminology like double exposure, superimposition, and frame to describe the experience of the exile from a self allows us to imagine an eviction that can be imaged, but perhaps never represented.
In his beautiful invocation of listening, philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy proposes a term renvoi, a wide and nuanced address to the possibilities of listening. It roughly translates as a return. This return could be a return to the sender, to return a gift, to repeat a phrase or a passage in music, but also to refrain, to refer, and to allude. In other words, it is a return to the notion of return, an idea looking at itself. We can think of the experience of our new VR show, Not an Imitation, via the notion of renvoi. You find yourself inside a room without having entered it. As you look around to the door already shut, it has let you in, without the ordinary formality of knocking or announcing yourself. This entry without sanction is the first return. From here, one begins to glide. A flying and walking at once, the space of the gallery expands and contracts with each swipe of the screen. To touch the glass of your phone is also to look at and feel the concrete of the floor, the wood of the door, and the white smoothness of the walls. This is the second return. The gallery rendered familiar and unfamiliar. Touch, vision, spatial intuition, all in a variable cadence ponder together with you. You have been here before, perhaps, but as a different kind of visitor who walked in through a door. Today, you are isomorphed into a space. It moves as you move, it folds as you turn, it finishes when you exit. Sewn, to stitch and to plant, delicately between these two returns is a third one, a return to the artworks. Made by all of us at a time far removed from this one, they enact return via repetition. We re-utter them to find remodulation. The discrepancies between then and now, the asymmetry of thought and vision, the extended moment of perception, all produce a new reading of ourselves and our worlds.
In 1985 in Toronto, a psychologist, Endel Tulving, observed that his amnesic patient not only had difficulty remembering his past, he also had trouble imagining possible future events. And so the term mental time travel, also called chronesthesia, was coined to describe the capacity to mentally reconstruct personal events from the past, as well as to imagine possible scenarios in the future. In other words, the act of remembering the past appears to be a mirror image of the act of imagining the future. Here, nostalgia is contingent on imagination, but equally, nostalgia of a kind is the foundation of projection. Our brain circuitry creates a reality all of our own. As the leading philosopher of memory has observed, remembering the past is a reconstructive process, just as imagining the future is a constructive one. Yes, sorry about that. While the second is necessarily based in imagination, our reconstruction of the past is no less creative or inaccurate. The tussle between the real and the virtual has also been playing out in another mode in the last few months. Several students, academics, activists, journalists, and thinkers have been imprisoned, declared enemies of the state, and charged with anti-terror laws. The question of terror has been radically recast. The real finds itself constantly contested, and conspiracy theories abound. The citizen has become a shaky category. Untruth passes as truth. Evidence is now being planted remotely onto devices. Deep fakes are producing alternate realities, and the virtual has taken on a sinister tone.
Not an imitation, ricochets between interfaces, here and there, then and now. This ricocheting is alive to new forms of practice. Following the lockdowns across the world, sweeping views of deserted streets, towns, cities, vast landscapes captured by drones began to emerge all across the internet. In these phantom images produced and relayed by machines, we saw a complete subtraction of the human. In their recently published work, Patricia Zimmerman and Karen Kaplan ask if coronavirus drone footage is in fact a new genre. On the other side of this hyper-produced human-less video material are reaction videos, or videos of people watching other people watching videos. This genre too has seen a huge explosion over the past year. Here, in contrast to the phantom imagery produced by drones, we see a redoubling of human vision in a potentially infinite loop. These two contrasting experiences of vision, each located in specific material histories of technology, signal to the cycle of consumption we find ourselves locked within. An agile negotiation of image cultures today would mean to create alternatives beyond the binary of a human-less dystopia and a hyper-individualized, atomized experience of perception. Images can help us affirmatively claim this time. It is pertinent to remember that when film or moving image technology was first invented, one of its biggest achievements was its ability to fix reality onto the surface of time. The famous first screening of the Lumiere brothers' train leaving the station, where audiences jumped out of their seats fearing that they may get crushed under the image of the oncoming train, bears testimony to this power of cinema even in its earliest utterance. To relate the world again to us by making it new. The fact that today we must communicate through images of ourselves and our worlds could encourage us to revisit the shock, thrill, and possibilities of the first moments of cinema.
Today, our touchable, feelable, sensate selves seem to have dematerialized into electronic dust. In the current political climate, our voices and thoughts are being profiled as data to be collected and analyzed. Our time of sharing, exchange, or even rejuvenation, mapped and guided by algorithms opaque to us. All of this is overwhelming to say the least. Perhaps this reevaluation can help us forge new contracts of attention and materiality within our milieu. The image is the laboratory of new forms of attention and distraction. Images are making this time of challenge and suffering both real by bearing testimony, but also simultaneously more livable by allowing us to enter worlds beyond our immediate material locations. Finally, many eloquent practitioners of culture have shown us how humanity's experience of modernity was not just represented by cinema, but was also deeply shaped by it. We now intuitively know that an epochal shift is underway, a new modernity where time, technology, senses, and human ambition must all be reconfigured. Images and screens can no longer be stopgap solutions or poor imitations of reality. Rather, they are our primary interlocutors, bearers of a new order of time. The pandemic has unsettled a lot, but maybe, just maybe, when the dust settles, we may be able to see that our lives and imaginations have been rendered a bit more lucid.
These prompts took the shape of tonight's show as our fellow artists responded, rereading their work in practice within this frame. With each work the artist chose to contribute to the show, we saw a virtual shell come to life. A thicket of code and programs became host to terracotta and wooden sculptures, a carpet, a blanket, foam marble, painting, prints, moving images, and sounds. Unrestricted by the hard boundaries of walls, columns, and girders, the virtual Project 88 could grow endlessly to accommodate works and propositions. This horizontal relay between the artist and the gallery's now fluid avatar is the adventure of this show.
Sabiha, if we could now move to the virtual gallery, please. Thank you so much. So with these thoughts, we'd like to invite you into Project 88's virtual gallery space to get a sense of the show. Using a virtual reality platform, the gallery space now enables viewers to navigate the artworks in 3 dimensions and to scale. I will briefly take you through some of the features. Each work, as you will see, has, of course, a label. More details about the media, etc., can be found in the viewing gallery. But of course, you can navigate the space as you choose, but we also have these markers on the floor, etc., which allow you to go up closer to a particular site in the gallery. This show also includes a video room. Sabiha, maybe if we could just pan towards that. And the video room has 3 films, which are also available on the viewing gallery. So when you go up to this part of the gallery, you'll be able to, if you move a bit to the right, which it's fine right now, but if you move a bit to the right, then you'll be able to see within the dark room or within the video room text which will let you know that you need to visit the viewing gallery in order to view the films, 3 of which are meant to be in there. Yeah, thanks. And now if we could just move to the right of the same wall. Similarly with the sound piece, the same holds true here as well. So the sound piece, oops. Anyway, the sound piece similarly can be accessed in the virtual gallery. So once, yeah. So I think we won't take too much time to navigate the space with you. I think that would be wonderful if you could do on your own, but we will take you to the viewing gallery right now, just to give you a sense of how the works are placed within here. So this is now the Project 88 visual viewing gallery. And within this, all of the 3 films follow one after the other, including the sound piece. And they can be seen full screen within the same page, like this. Yeah. And I think with that, we should just say thank you for that. And we hope you enjoy navigating Not an Imitation. Thanks, Abiha. I think we're good. Thank you.
Great. So I now ask all Project 88 artists to join in. Those who have their videos off, please switch them on. And yeah, let's take us through some of the ideas that have emerged from our ongoing conversations. So I hand over to you, Ro.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pallavi. So I'd like to begin by inviting Muneem Wasif, who joins us from Berlin. Hi, Muneem. Are we on? Yeah. Just to take us through the question of nostalgia. How do you place the idea of nostalgia within your work? Of course, and this is specific to this current moment where a lot of what we're facing is the result of sedimented violence to the environment and societies, etc. So in the light of this, is it possible to be nostalgic? We'd like you to think about that with us. Thank you. Muneem, are you still here?
Okay, maybe we can come back to Muneem then.
Okay, so then a lot of what Muneem was also talking about was we would have talked about would have been the violence of the moment. So with that, then when we're talking about the fact that world over the question of terror is being recast, welcome to Anupam Roy, who is joining us from Bengal. And Anupam, are we here? I mean, are you here as well?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
fantastic. So our question to you, we were looking at how the real is constantly being contested and conspiracy theories are abounding. And your work particularly apprehends the ominous edge of this current moment. So could you speak to this?
Yeah, actually, what I'd like to talk in this context is that, can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, basically my kind of practice, what I working like last 10, 15 years. So mostly making propaganda. So, and then this question is like, what is real and what is kind of, unreal or untrue, that I'm constantly dealing with. But the thing is that real, and for me, real is always is the contradiction. And then thing is the to approaching the contradiction is that like, for instance, giving a very simple example is like, what is water? Water is like, for me, is like, to talking about water, people are writing about water, about sound about the water, but water is H2O. This contradiction creating the water. So like when we think about the image, like, now we are facing today, like, everywhere this campaign is going on, for instance, no vote to BJP, or like to, defeating the fascism in the country. But now I'm in Bengal, in rural Bengal, and traveling and making graffitis for the election campaign, mostly anti BJP campaign. So in that also, like, when we enter into the kind of very rural India, where like today for the to meeting attend the meeting, that I came to the little bit city in the kind of place where I can get the electricity and everything. But still the village is like, most of the villages in Bakura, for instance, there are a lot of villages, there is no electricity. There is, when we talk about these images, WhatsApp or social media, there is no reach even. But still, if you see the RSS or like BJP are reached there, and they're creating their own narrative, and on that particular kind of spaces, how you deal with the images, or how you deal with your propaganda material to communicate with them, to confront with their ideas. So in that case also, like, I feel like our task is to kind of to understand that what you said in your introduction, that I think it's very much Gramscian, that you said that when kind of there is no, like, old is dying, new cannot be born, kind of in this interregnum different morbid symptom appears. And then in this kind of reality, to expose the reality, what is actually the reality, in terms of my understanding, to show up, that it is also depends on the kind of very specific places where we move. In the social media, we think that that we are approaching to the masses, but that mass that you wrote in your paper also, that the introduction, that citizen is which is shaky, but here the citizen, in a sense, the villagers, uh, they are not also shaky. It's already decided in a certain long period that what they're going to, whom they're going to vote, whom for what they're going to vote. But for them, the reality is like they're dependent on their very specific issue, in terms of land questions, in terms of their wages, in terms of dam, the getting the water or not. So it's for me that when we are making the artwork, for me it's that inspired me, or like that challenges me, that how to put the image into the very specific places. So I don't know how it works in the gallery space, how it works in the social media, but when we came here, and most of my last few years of my work were placed in this particular context, then it makes a different kind of sense. And when I put it into this kind of platform, it makes maybe different sense, where I need to put things together, which is not single image, may not make any sense, but sometime to creating that installation, or the creating, putting a lot of images together, uh, that may giving another kind of sense. So yeah, like for me, real and unreal maybe itself is a contradictory, and it this contradiction itself is creating different kind of reality. uh, yeah, I think I'm done.
Yeah, thanks for that,
Yeah,
Anupam.
this.
And yeah, also the question, if anyone has any questions, we're taking them right at the end. So please hang on to your thoughts um, for the end of the session. Actually, on the question of violence, since we're talking about violence and terror, another sort of register of violence and terror is actually evoked by the Autolith group in their film Zone 2, which has actually all the signs of a place that exists, that's real enough, and yet through the haunting frames of remaining protected nature reserves of London, and images from the Black Lives Matter movement, and through sort of encounters with these sort of temporal deviations and strange kind of temporal refractions, we are actually reminded in a way of both the strength as well as of the fragility of this reality. So Angelika and Kojo, thanks so much for joining us from London this evening. And I suppose our question to you is a bit more, speculative, which is, how do we imagine the path or the course of a future, right? Is the future an outpost of the present? And what would a cosmology of the future look like if it were sort of separated from the question of identity? So yeah, if we could ask you to think a little bit around this idea with us.
Thank you for those questions. I think you asked at least 5 there. So maybe I'll take a couple of them. Anjali will take a couple, and between us, we'll manage to navigate some of your questions. I think the real preoccupation with Zone 2 is not so much to remember the past or the future, but to remember the present, the actual present. Zone 2 is a portrait of a global pandemic which has disproportionate effects which are experienced at a local level. That's what it's trying to capture, the experience of a global pandemic as it's lived in Northeast London in the summer of 2020, a summer that is long since gone and now feels like another world, but it's less than a year past. So the effort to do that requires an attentiveness to the gestures of an everyday life which now exist under a kind of ceremony of prophylaxis, ceremony of protective gestures, a ceremony of rituals, a ceremony of interpretation, a certain mood of scrutiny, skepticism, distance, detachment, suspicion. These are the moods and the tones that this video tries to get to. There is a speculative dimension, which is that ever since we made a video in Fukushima, of which today is in fact the anniversary, back in 2012, we've had this hypothesis that there is a difference between an accident and a catastrophe. The idea is that an accident is located in time and space. It's specific. You can point to the car that hit you. You can point to the injury on your leg. You can point to the date. You can point to the time. You can point to the place. That's why it's an accident. A catastrophe, on the other hand, is unlimited in time and space. That's to say, it has generalized capacities which open up a fault line back and forward through time and space. So this idea means that events from the past are can no longer be characterized as chronologically historical, but now appear to bear on the present and take on a presence. The past takes on a presence. Similarly, the future is no longer prospectively ahead of us on a railway of time, but on the contrary, converges on the present. That's why it's a catastrophe, because a fault line has opened and the divisions that we use to navigate history and the future have collapsed in on the present, which then changes its shape. So the temporal deviations that you refer to are an attempt to indicate this. The move through a specific cemetery in Northeast London, where many abolitionists worked to abolish slavery. That's a question of, that's related to the question of the disproportionate amounts of police deaths. That's related to the fact that disproportionately in the UK and in many other countries, Black and brown people are suffering exposure to infection, risk, mortality, morbidity, and death. So what we are trying to capture is the lived experience of the pandemic and the ongoing crisis of racial capitalism as they bear in on the present. And so what you have is an attention to scale. You're trying to pay attention to the scale of a crisis as it's lived locally, phenomenologically, sensorially. You're also trying to gesture to the confusion and the kinds of mixed temporal regime that is operative when you are living through a catastrophe. So, you know, these are the concerns which are really animating Zone 2. Anjali, I don't know if you want to pick up on any aspects of that.
I mean, we'll have been working together for about 20 years next year, and I think this is the first work we've made, like literally down the road. Kind of being forced into a kind of intimacy with this space during the lockdown was a way to. So first of all, I have to say hi, everybody. Hi, Shri. Hi. Thank you, Rohini and Pallavi. Thanks for inviting us. So, you know, I think it was this film Zone 2 was also almost like a kind of part two of another film that we made earlier the year before last, or was it last year? I'm losing track of time, called Infinity Minus Infinity, which was a film which was looking at the relationship between racial capitalism and climate and the environment, and thinking about how, you know, you talked about identity earlier. I mean, it's for us, it's not really, I mean, this question of identity, I think, is it cannot be removed from the planetary. So, you know, in the sense that, you know, humans as much as other forms of life and other forms of matter have been mined and devalued and used within a kind of value creation. So for us, I think that Infinity Minus Infinity is obviously another work, but in that work, there's a deity who talks about breath and says, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And it was a really strange thing to see suddenly this idea of breath being, and the actual which came from George Floyd, and the suffocation and the killing of the murder of George Floyd, revived within this, used within on people's masks, and the actual sense of breath being taken both by the virus and by pollution and by the killings of African American and Black people in the UK by the police. For us, the film was almost prescient in terms of how this then became kind of reality. So we were interested in how to think about that in the lockdown, and then obviously the protests started happening. I think what hit us was the sense, especially in relation to the Abney Park Cemetery, which is down the road, which is a cemetery for nonconformists and suffragettes and various different people on the left, let's say, since the 1700s or 1800s. It's also Europe's largest arboretum. Thousands of birds. I go there every day with my dog now. Is the sense that it is very much, yes, a space which contains in it, the idea of abolition. It proposes the idea of abolition as the equivalent, in a way, of enlightenment in Western thought. And I'm quoting, Mbembe, when I say, abolitionism precedes Western thought and guarantees enlightenment, when thinking about Haiti, etc. And that is a big, I think, aspect of thinking around the afterlives of slavery and how they impact directly on this space around us, especially in relation to the horrific kind of the kind of putting to death almost of people of color, the disproportionate dying of people of color, during the pandemic here. The relationship that we wanted to create really was not about, it was not about Black Lives Matter as such, but it was more about the way that landscape is metabolizing all of these sensations. One aspect was that suddenly, I think for many people, nature takes on a very different logic. It takes on a very different capacity. Somehow the virus has emerged directly from nature. The idea that the virus is, a scale that has now erupted into view. In the same way that Black Lives Matter erupted this sense of abolition into view, So we live in the middle of the cemetery and the marshes. And I think these two spaces for us really became a place in which to think about how the ecology of video and the ecology of thinking around scalar time can be worked to produce a structure of feeling. Kojo, is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think that's great. I think that responds to you. I hope that responds to your points.
Yes, no, I mean, we really appreciate you taking us through the thicket of all these ideas that have undergird the work. And yeah, I'm sure all of us have many questions that we'll come back with at the end. But I would also like to move now to Sandeep. Thanks, Sandeep, for joining us. And, I want to kind of ask you that you sort of describe Tree Skins, your work in the show, as a slice of flowing matter, right? There's an invocation of flesh, the skin, there's mimicking of bark, leaf, aluminium. What does this material alliance actually signal? Is there a kind of a large ecological unified body that you're seeking to produce? And if so, is this unification tranquil, or is it marked by disquiet and unrest? Yeah, these are just some questions because we're on the question of violence and terror. You're on mute, Sandeep.
Oh, hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. There isn't an alliance of these elements. It's an encounter. And they're basically encounters of moving bodies, bodies as human bodies, water bodies, bodies of nature, trees, everything that emanates from the earth. Aluminum has been extracted from the earth out into the air now, right? So there's a mobility to the ecology or the what's the word? Geology. The geological strata are actually in motion. And so for me, it's a way of creating these patches or these bits of textural experience that are physical. So they're encounters that happen between bodies that are physical, and the bodies are always in motion. So there's a relational nature to movement, mobility being one of the key factors in the work. So there isn't necessarily an alliance with aluminum per se. It's just one encounter of a very particular kind. This work is modular because I think of images as little patches of experience that I stitch together in different ways. They break down, they reassemble, they reconfigure depending on the context. So this work now in this show is doing something very different than it was in a show at the kitchen, which was on whiteness. And in that show, the read was very different because of the context of the work. So I'm still thinking about this idea in the context of the pandemic, because this work is about touch. It's about physical contact. It's about coming together. It's about the idea that vision and touch become the same. So that has become a very difficult thing in these times. So for me, there is a sort of poignant longing, if you will, or a record of that nostalgia of what it was like to feel, to sense the touching of moving bodies. There isn't a teleological end to this work as in unifying it or breaking it down. It's just an encounter of movement.
Yeah. On the screen, we can actually
I'll just say that in the whiteness show, these were standing like columns. You walked into the work and you were, on one side, you saw the earth-like evocation of the skin. And on the other side, you saw this really bloody flesh-like sensation or experience of the skin when you were standing in between them. So it evoked a sense of violence in relationship to Black Lives Matter, in terms of racial injustice, in terms of the blindness of whiteness, if you will. And so they were read very differently in that context because they were both of nature, our nature, both the sustaining, gentle, tender aspects of our nature and the violence that's embedded in our nature as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I mean, yes. We have more questions, obviously, connected to what you just said. But like I said, we wait till the end and come back with more questions. But I also now want to move to, sort of briefly annotating Khageshwar's work, because in the light of what Sandeep has spoken about, about this tension between the manufactured and the natural and what it sort of, symbolizes. Khageshwar's work, also works on similar lines. The study of things rich, gold, wild It's actually sort of a study of architecture within organic forms. And here, terracotta works both as a scaffolding as well as skin. So the ridge gourd, which is larger than life, it's simultaneously exuberant as well as decaying. And the work also echoes themes of erasure, impermanence, and transformation. And maybe we can see an image of Khageshwar's work here on the screen. Yes. Great. Yeah. Ro, you can take over from here.
So actually just picking up on the question of erasure, I'd like to bring in Huma Mulji, who now joins us from Bristol. And there seems to be an inherent critique of big history in your work, where erasure is a process of recovery. Within the context of this past year, could you talk a little bit about the relationship between labor and futility, which you have described as being both productive and critical?
Thank you, Rohini. It's a big question, and talking about big history, I think if anything, the only thing I'm sure of is that there's a deep sort of skepticism in the work or in me of historical narrative, obviously. And I think it's interesting. I was thinking about this question, and I was thinking about where it comes from, and I think there's a kind of biographical element to it, which is that I consider myself really badly educated. And I think that that's actually a privilege because, because that is where the initial skepticism comes from, when you realize that, the education that I went through was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And these sort of fragmented bits of sort of bodies of knowledge, if you like, leave gaps, like collage. They leave gaps for the learner, for myself, or to consider, to reinvent, to speculate on. So there's never any kind of concreteness to a narrative, and especially growing up in a kind of post-colonial city, there is obviously a kind of this shadow of a European philosophy of history, which real life sort of challenges at every turn. And so I think the works that that you see here, which is called Ode to a Piano Pen, does two things. I mean, there's Cujo spoke about time and the past and the future in the present. Anupam talked about it a bit as well. And so I think in this case, there is a kind of stillness in the work, and there's a kind of recalibration, I think, constantly. I was looking at writing. I was looking, I'm really interested in fiction and how writers deal with the process of editing. And I consider myself, and all of us as constant, works in progress, where you can, there's a freedom to think and rethink and recalibrate ideas. And so I was looking at sort of manuscripts that had been sort of either censored or not produced, or even, James Joyce's manuscript of the Finnegan's Wake, which, I'm sure people are familiar with, which is a very visual document. And I was thinking of how to aestheticize these ideas. And using thread and embroidery also meant that there's a potential for unpicking the ideas again and kind of reversing it and then redoing it. But the title, for example, I mean, talking about nostalgia, which is what your curatorial frame was. And I was thinking about, this, the title, which is Ode to a Piano Pen, which used to be these sort of, they still exist, but they're not the same. That this really, this yellow barreled biro, which always sort of, leaked this sticky ink. And I was thinking about almost sentimentally this idea of writing, the activity of the head and the hand as a kind of collaboration and in a rhythm of this sort of thought, writing, leaking of the ink, and then the restarting of something all over again. And I made these work, actually these works started a year earlier, and then during 2020, they were, that's when I actually finished them, but they were made in 2 different places as well. I don't know if this is relevant to say, but you know, the works were embroidered in Bristol, the writing was embroidered in Bristol, and then I took it to Pakistan and gave it to an embroiderer with the drawings of these spillages of ink. And this sort of move from one place to another was also really important during this time. And I haven't quite, you know, I don't know, I'm going to try and articulate this here, because I had the privilege of traveling during 2020. And it was actually quite remarkable, because what happened was that there was, you know, you look at the world, one from 2 entirely different perspectives, and you are a participant and observer of both at once. And so the works also sort of bring these 2 worlds together. You know, when I left Bristol, it was sort of December, and there was a dip in the sort of infection rate. And so I was able to travel. I go to Pakistan with this in absolute fear of, you know, this is what's happening in the world. And everybody there seems to think that this is a European problem. I mean, not to make it sound almost simple, because there were very close family members of friends, parents of friends who had lost their lives in it. So it wasn't that it wasn't taken seriously, but it was really thought that, you know, we have been through so many things like this before. And this is, but we will participate. It was also quite funny to see that, you know, everybody is wearing PPE there. So the doodwala will be wearing like a, you know, a surgical hat, and everybody's wearing gloves, almost as if to participate in this theatrical thing. And I found myself shift between 2 worldviews constantly, back and forth, back and forth. You come with a certain worldview, you know, you behave a certain way, and then slowly you imbibe other ways of thinking about things. And then by the time you leave, you're a different person. Then you come here and you instantly feel fearful again in a totally different way. So this push and pull of different worldviews was really interesting throughout to me. But I don't know if I've actually answered your question at all, but I'm just sort of kind of,
No, you have
considering what it means. And, you know, of course, there's no belief in one big truth at all. So, you know, there is, I think, if anything, through the work, you know, I kind of, there's a, I suppose, like fiction writing, which I trust so much more than any kind of truth, is that it reveals it insight, it gives you insight, and you could see truth through an emotion or an insight, rather than as a concrete, you know, one way of thinking about something. So yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. No, actually, I think it's so interesting, because we're talking about, in a sense, travel. You're talking about transmission of many things, not just fear, but also physical transmission. And then I'm also thinking back to Sandeep, who was talking about vision and touch, which will actually bring me perfectly to Neha Choksi. Thank you, Neha. And she joins us from LA. Neha, in your work, Repeated Integrity Oak, also coming back to erasure, which we began with Huma, erasure is a slow, barely visible process where the gradual remorphing of the matrix or the circle in your work resists translation, but evokes contact and touch. So in the wake of the pandemic, the way that we think about or even talk about touch has become communicative, you know, in a sense. So it's a series or a sequence of transfers or transmissions. So now with touch as this sort of hyper contested act, how might we reimagine it as a form of relay?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rohini, for the question. I'm sorry I'm not on video. I'm not well, and I am beaming from a cozy nook, which has very bad reception. Let me go back to the first part of your question, where you mentioned the gradual remorphing of the matrix. Perhaps you can put up the image of the piece. I kind of wanted to modulate that. I don't think of this work as involving morphing per se, but maybe we can read it as a stubborn resistance to morphing. It is the same matrix's imprint repeated insistently, and let us even say in the context of this exhibition, repeated nostalgically. The effacement that the repetition creates is direct. It is pressing, literally, in the case of a woodcut, you're pressing down on the paper. It is intimate. And yet I want to remind you all that the woodcuts are not the wood. We're talking about this matrix, but it's not what we're actually looking at. The matrix is missing. What you see is not the thing in itself. It is the kiss, the touch of the thing on the paper. Which brings me back to the second part of your question, Rohini, which is how to imagine touch as a relay. I guess we're all aware that the matrix is touching the paper. We have this residue of the intimacy, the accumulation of the intimate. And then you also have an awareness of the sort of figure-ground relationship where the interdependency of the two is vital for the read of the piece. But thinking about really makes me think about time. Kind of like vaguely hearkening back to what Kojo was saying. The work as it stands in 7 panels actually begs you to think what came before and what comes next. What next in perpetuity? It's something actually that John Baldessari always asked me whenever I was making work. He was always like, what next? Like, I mean, you stopped here, but like, what next? Like in the work itself, you know? So I've started and stopped in a sort of visual realm, but if you go further, where do you end with this touching? In the 3rd dimension, in the 4th dimension, in the black hole, beyond the event horizon. So like maybe there's something where everything is collapsing into the present, as Kojo put it, like something like that may actually be relevant to work. Yeah, so I guess those are my casual thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Neha. And I'd actually like to carry forward these thoughts around touch and intimacy with Tejal. Tejal joins us from Goa, and Tejal, your work actually, kind of draws our attention to violence and love that so often marks our relationship to nature. So given that the COVID-19 virus is actually sort of enmeshed, right, in our construction of nature as well as in the structures of sort of politics and society, how if we can ask, how has your understanding of this relationship between nature, human, etc., shifted over the past year?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me also this evening. Just want to check, can you all see this sheet of paper? And you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to invite all of you to just allow my voice to be like a magnet. Let it be sound that draws you in. And I want to share something with you so you can reflect with me. So get very comfortable, take a deep breath, feel the contact of your feet on the floor if you can. And if you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. And without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper are. Interbeing is a word that is not in the dictionary yet, but we combine the prefix inter with the verb to be we have a new verb, interbe. Without a cloud, we cannot have paper, so we can say that the cloud and the sheet of paper inter are. If we look into the sheet of paper even more deeply, we can see the sunshine in it. If the sunshine is not there, the forest cannot grow. In fact, nothing can grow. Even we cannot grow without sunshine. And so we know the sunshine is also in this sheet of paper. The paper and the sunshine inter are. And if we continue to look, we can see the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see the wheat. We know that the logger cannot exist without her daily bread. And therefore, the wheat that became her bread is also in the sheet of paper. And the logger's father and mother are in it too. When we look in this way, we see that without all of these things, this sheet of paper cannot exist. Looking even more deeply, we see we are in it too. This is not difficult to see, because when we look at a sheet of paper, the sheet of paper is part of our perception. Your mind is in here, and mine is also. So we can say that everything is in here with the sheet of paper. You cannot point out one thing that is not here. Time, space, the earth, the rain, the minerals in the soil, the sunshine, the cloud, the river, the heat. Everything coexists with this sheet of paper. That is why I think the word interbe should be in the dictionary. To be is to interbe. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to interbe with every other thing. The sheet of paper is because everything else is. Suppose we try to return one of the elements to its source. Suppose we return the sunshine to the sun. Do you think that the sheet of paper will be possible? No, without sunshine, nothing can be. And if we return the logger to her mother, then we have no sheet of paper either. The fact is that this sheet of paper is made up only of non-paper elements. And if we return these non-paper elements to their sources, then there can be no paper at all. Without non-paper elements like mind, logger, sunshine, and so on, there will be no paper. As thin as the sheet of paper is, it the universe sutras opposite that more.
Okay, I think there's been an issue with Tejal's sound, but Tejal, if you can hear us, do you want to try again? Okay. I think there's a connection issue there, but okay, maybe we'll come back to Tejal. And I also want to quickly jump now to Amitesh, who joins us from Bombay. And Amitesh, my question to you is kind of also on similar lines, which is that, how do you assess sort of, because your work deals again, with this sort of interspecial dialogue, right, between the human, the animal, plants, etc. So how do you assess now this sort of interconnectedness or beingness that Tejal was sort of also talking about in your work?
Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah. So in my work, mostly I just avoid like burden of ideas, or the kind of when you go through the so many thing and so many ideologies and a clash of so many different thoughts, and it's very difficult to being a neutral and looking at all those things in my own way when I'm painting, when I'm working on it, right? Because if you are like a one way you're going and one-sided, inspired by this kind of fear of inspiration also, like, so that in this time also, because it was very like, because I lived in my childhood also in Chhattisgarh, mostly there was like almost like a we used to get only twice in a week the light, so mostly 3-4 days in the dark. So I could sense it like because knowing people in that way, and evening was like dark and mornings like light, and discovering everything in that way, not so crowded place, and mostly into those kind of places. So in Bombay, when I'm here, I'm getting those, those elements, which is like, which enter and or trespass each other, all those things. So it's basically my work based on the kind of, this kind of frictional thing, like it goes through the friction, and like it almost like rubbing each other, and to basically keeping all those things, and being if you go through the kind of political scene in India or overall in the world is going through, so it is like a very easy to comment, or you can give your own perception or your own way of looking at all those things. So but I always try to keep those things being like and when I use the animals and the kind of nature to being in that way, because we are like, we can exchange dialogues and all those things, but being animal, to like looking at those things and their existence and their space, and somewhere, but how these things are, is affecting the whole society and this world and overall. So I'm working on it, basically these elements. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amitesh. I'd like to go to Prajakta Potnis now, who's joining us from Bombay. Prajakta, in your Zone series, the place takes on many forms. When compounded by nostalgia, you suggest that place is dislocation, displacement, either by choice or by force, the result of which is often alienation. So, in the wake of the pandemic, the domestic is no longer a place of safe return. It is now hyperlinked. It is intersecting with work, with politics, with pedagogy, with violence. So, in light of this intensification of the domestic, how do you see your practice recalibrating attention between containment and expansion? We'd love you to think through these ideas with us.
Hello, everyone. And it's amazing to see the whole gang here. And I think I'd like to share a screen and maybe draw everyone into a different kind of landscape. So I'm going to share my screen. One second. How do yeah. Can you view this as a slide? Can't hear you.
I think you have to move to presenter
Yes.
view. Yeah, but we can't see it full screen. So you have to do it as slideshow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I'm planning to leave some images on while I speak and then dwell a bit in the context of the current work, the Zone, that's being shown at Project 88 here online. I'd like to begin by evoking some verses from the poem Questions of Travel by former US poet laureate Elizabeth Bishop, that was first published in 1956. Think of the long trip home. Should we have stayed at home and thought of here? Where should we be today? Continent, city, country, society. The choice is never wide and never free. And here or there. No, should we have stayed at home, wherever that may be? sorry, this coordination between images and words is always so strange. Place for me is a geographical entity that can be portrayed through imagination, envisioned either within this world or located somewhere in outer space, or as a site within a psychological map of one's mind. It can be sketched through references and cues from history, mythology, or memories. When laced with nostalgia, it can denote longing. Yearning implies distance. It suggests dislocation, displacement either by choice or by force. Alienation is often a result of such kind of movement. But then what is homelessness? Is it a condition of our times where we are all refugees or even tourists in transit in an in between place? Home, with its allure as a place of belonging, when conceptualized within the politics of domesticity and the ideologies of nationhood and citizenship, can become a powerful construct enabling the questioning of the production of space. In the work titled Room Full of Rooms, installed at the Kadistat Foundation in 2012, I was interested in looking at the city through the windows of its residents. I wanted to see what the outside looked like from the inside. I photographed parts of different people's homes and projected it onto the walls of the gallery. The window was from a Tunisian man's home, while the ceiling was from a French woman's apartment, and the door was from an apartment of a Sri Lankan family. The need to literally capture light from the apartment drew me to the slide projectors. The idea of carving cavities within the walls moves into the recent work titled Zone, which is being shown in the current online exhibition at Project 88, where found film slides were projected onto the walls of a domestic freezer. These film slides were made by an unknown traveler. They are images of Alps shot in the early 70s that I found in an old shop in Berlin. By projecting a landscape inside an enclosed cavity, it was a way of opening up one of the walls. My endeavor was to open up the wall spaces to create a space within a space, and in some instances, carve a window within this enclosed environment, quite similar to the wallpapers of a snow-clad mountain found in living rooms in middle-class homes, especially in the early 90s. These are images of elsewhere, these unattainable landscapes that could have been only reimagined through memory. By freezing them, I'm hoping to going back in time in a naive attempt to conserve these sites from aging. Yeah, I leave here with these thoughts and maybe, yeah, come back to.
Okay, thanks so much, Prajakta. And I'd like to move on to the work of Shreyas Karle, who is joining us from Mumbai. Sabiha, if we could just see Shreyas's work within the VR space. So in his work, Needless Precision, which is part of our show, Shreyas explores modes of archiving the domestic. He asks that if one tends to museumize the domestic, would one contradict the institution or become one?
Hello.
Is that Shreyas?
Yeah. Hi. I
Hi,
don't know.
hi.
Am I visible?
Yes, yes.
Am I?
You're audible.
Okay.
Yeah. So could
I'm sorry. I'm in the middle. Yeah. I mean this. This was a difficult time. I'm in the middle of a deadline, so I'm just outside the print studio here in Bombay. But you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close my screen because I am not in a very comfortable position at the moment, and I'm going to speak. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just I'm just going to read a small passage from Tossing's book. I swear I saw this.
Shreyas, I think we've lost you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I went off and I'm back again.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a passage from Tossing's book. Um, what I see also is an unholy alliance, or at least symmetry, between the enclosed space of the automobile rushing into the tunnel and the nylon cocoon into which the woman seems to be sewing the man. The automobile offers the fantasy of a safe space in a cruel and unpredictable world, a space of intimacy and daydreaming. Yet the automobile is also a hazard, a leading cause of death and disability in the third world. As against this, consider a home on the freeway made of nylon bags, a home that takes the organic form of the insect world, like the cocoon of a grub destined to become a butterfly. In this vein, I also discern a fearful symmetry between the nylon cocoon and the steep concrete walls adjoining the unlit tunnel of the freeway. When I asked the taxi driver why people would choose to lie there, and he responds, because it's warm. My question assumes the sheer unfathomability, the impossibility of imagining that human beings would choose such a place to lie down in the same way as you or I lie down in our bedrooms. My question already has built into my fear and my astonishment that people would choose such radical enclosure. Why would you put yourself in this concrete grave? And his response, because it's warm, suggests that it has been chosen because of its embrace. As I dwell on these thoughts, I suspect that this hideous location is chosen because it's hideous, and what's more dangerous. There at least you are probably safer from attack by the police, death squad, vigilante, and other poor people. Then there is that other type of enclosure, the one that grabs me most, that part of the picture in which the woman seems to be enclosing herself as well as the man. Stitch by stitch, the outside is becoming the inside, the stitcher becomes the stitched. I am reminded of that little boy years ago in a funeral service in Bogota who said, I want to live in a closet. His parents were research sociologists. Uh, his parents were research sociologists working for the Jesuits in Bogota, gathering and publishing statistics on political violence. They were assassinated in 1997 late at night in their bedroom by paramilitaries. The boy escaped by hiding in a closet. Yeah, so um, I mean, I do not have an exact reason of why I read this, but I also feel this is something because the book itself, where Tossing talks about his his memories in the form of and everything that he has seen gets depicted as a drawing. One kind of starts looking at it, whether it's a fiction that has turned into a reality, or a reality that has turned into a fiction. Doesn't really create any kind of logic, but in realm of the conversation that we have been having around the show, around the curation. Firstly, I'm sorry for not being able to thank both you and Pallavi for curating this show, and Project 88 for getting onto this platform. So sorry for not mentioning that before, but I feel in the light of the show, this is the passage that kind of circulates in my head. Yeah, and I'm sorry for not for the very poor reception. I'm actually in the middle of printing outside the print studio. It's there's certain I mean, just because we are leaving Bombay very soon, we are moving very close to our farm where we'll be in Goa, and this is our last month here, and we have to wrap up things before we leave. Yeah.
Thank you so
Over to
much.
you, Rohini.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shreyas. So actually, I'd like to take the themes that we've already talked about, which is, of course, dislocation and its attendant alienation forward. And I'd like to move to Himali Singh Soin, who's joining us from Delhi. So, today the relation between, or the relationships between body, contagion, virality, location, proximity, all of them have been thrown into this sort of state of flux. In fact, even the poles, which one imagines to be at the farthest limit of life on Earth, have been implicated in this moment. So the Black Lives Movement is a rejection of the alienation resulting from the othering of the brown black body. How do you interrogate the position of the aliens? So just your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Rohini and Pallavi. It feels like actually some of the binaries or the dualities that you brought out in your concept note with the here and then and the now and after are kind of almost archetyped or stereotyped when you think about the poles. The poles are antipodes. They are the distant other. They are these edges of the planet where they've both been projected as these colonial, like this frontier of colonial fetishism, and also this crack where you can maybe imagine this other future, look into the next galaxies, which was often the thought with the poles, that right there you can look out of the Earth and see somewhere else. And the fetishism came because there was like a common belief in Antarctica, for example, that men used to walk with on their heads, or like women had ears dangling from their feet. So there was this imagination of these other places. My idea for subcontinentment, which is the piece that that you're showing, is to kind of collapse these distances a little bit, to show that entanglement of the then and now, or the here and there, to show that actually just yesterday there was this piece about how soot from North India is affecting the loss of sea ice in the Arctic. And that loss is now going to create an exacerbated monsoon this summer. So these places are not so far away after all. So that was, and in subcontinentment is also this idea that in that loss of ice, there has to be, in the loss that we are facing here in India too, there has to be some kind of opening for contentment, or some way of finding joy, as Jibesh Bakshi loves to say. So subcontinentment combines the word subcontinent and contentment, and it tries to use the Arctic and the Antarctic circles as a kind of projection map to posit a South Asian futurism, which it quickly realizes that it has failed at, both thinking about South Asia as a place that cannot exist, and futurism as something that is inherently embedded in all the violences that everybody has been speaking about. But what it does try to find is these moments, like with right after demonetization, you have this purple print coming out with the Mangalyaan on it. There's the Mars rover on this money. There are these kind of like deep violences in our imagination of the future, and how we can maybe return to these pasts to excavate and imagine something that allows us to breathe, as Otolit mentioned. I was thinking of maybe reading one poem, which is called Thinking Like an Island. We think like an island. We are both our bodies and the water that we resist. We are made from an explosion and also an erosion. We are delusional. We die, and every time our souls rise up for a little more clarity. We wake up to take the oblique journey back to the shore. We are deserted in the world's noisy grief, and still we are the stillness. We are briefly the bomb in Baghdad. We are the finite area and the infinite perimeter. We are opposite like that. A half-life of love mixed with time running out, trying always to give it word. Trying always to give it word so it stays. Trying always to stay far enough from its radiation so it never withers, like the cornerstone of Kaaba is withering from the multitude of kisses laid upon it.
Thanks, him.
You're welcome. Thank you for making the show.
Yes. So I think after that, from the alien, it's interesting to move to the domestic. And for this, I'd like to actually invite Risham, who joins us from Lahore. And Risham's work sort of restages this crosstalk between domesticity and the world at large, between history and politics and machine and the body. So Risham, if I can ask you, how do you sort of recalibrate these exchanges between the past and the present, between nostalgia and in this sort of ordered moment?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Pallavi. Yeah, I think when I was making this work that's being shown right now, it's a quilt with these sparrows that have, like, I was imagining them to have come from the future and kind of, dwelling over this archaic machine, an invention from the Industrial Revolution. And so I wasn't like really very consciously thinking of these sparrows from my childhood. They were like creatures from the future. But recently, like all of this last year, I was working on this archive, these recordings that my mother made of singing lessons with the star Chote Ghulam Ali Khan, recordings of me singing with him and also of her. And I realized that, throughout the recordings, there were these sparrows who were part of our, daily existence in the house, because it was this old pre-partition house with 20 feet high ceiling. And so these sparrows would come in from the skylights and they would make their nests on the ledges of the beams. And so, and then I made another work recently, part of which I'll show. And when I made that work, I wasn't thinking of this quilt. When we had a conversation, I thought how closely they were connected, and it was the sparrows that were connecting them. And so I thought I'll share a part of that work with you over here. Sorry. So you may not be able to hear the sparrows that well in this recording through the laptop, but yeah, and I'm going to share the work here. Now the screen share. I have this. How do I share this?
There's this green icon, Risham, you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom window.
Yeah, no, that I've done.
Yes. Then you can
And
click
then,
your choice
okay.
for which.
Yeah, so the sparrows like really, helped me do this time travel to the early 80s, into my early teens, like the formative years and the experience of Lahore and generally what was happening around me. And so I thought, these two works were so closely connected, because of the sparrows and also through the larger question of the system and the times that we're living in.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Risham. It was deeply moving work. And yes, and from Lahore, we come to Delhi, where we're joined by Raqs Media Collective. JB, Shraddha, your work, Do Not Touch the Work of Art, sort of, becomes a prophecy, right? And the question I suppose that Ro and I have is that what is the purchase of this prophecy on questions of value of art as a concept? Today, most of what we're seeing is sort of a hurried attempt to almost transpose the idea of the value of art as a physical object onto digital and virtual interfaces. And this show is obviously an attempt to interrupt that and to be able to think about how the question of the value of art can be sort of re-articulated. So if I could just ask you to share some thoughts around this question.
Shuddha will first speak. Then I will annotate. Kahan gaya, Shuddha?
I had to unmute myself. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Rohini and Pallavi and Sri for this wonderful evening that we're having so many strange connections between all sorts of things. The question of value is both a troublingly prescient one, because I think this please do not touch the work of art, which is a much older work of ours, and now in this new avatar for Zoom experience. Jibesh said this is our first Zoom work. It's obviously about touch and about contagion and about the anxiety of touching and rarity, experiences that are made rare or because of the fact they're made valuable because they become increasingly rare. I mean, you know that the rarer a work is, the more valuable it is. So, which makes us think about the things that are rare now, you know, extraordinary things and ordinary things and the difference between them. I've been actually completely serendipitously reading the poetry of Risham's dad, Najm Hussain. And I was very struck by a poem that he had written. It's originally in Punjabi, which is a beautiful language, but I have the English translation, and it's called To the Ordinary Days. Ordinary days don't have names, notices of births and deaths, and special days in newspapers, arraigning tents and catering in history, carving stones for palaces and tombs and special days. Numbers of ordinary days keep dropping off from calendars. Behind the bars of time, ordinary days give up. Blue feet and black hands and face have continued to live with the hope that if from our breaking and making, somehow that night could be availed that will stand across the bars of the years, will call out our names, those ordinary days. And with this, I come to a little piece of fiction. Huma spoke of the need for stories and the importance of fiction. This is a short story, a Jataka tale that Jibesh, Monica, and I had once written to accompany the photograph, the image of an elephant. And the story is, again, a prescient one. This was written in 2012, but it seems to be about now. It's called On the Undertaking to Entertain an Empty Metropolis. We've all seen our cities emptying during this pandemic year, and then filling up again with spaces of protest, and then emptying again, and then filling up again. So this is about an emptying city. On the undertaking to entertain an empty metropolis. Confronted with the dereliction of a once great city, a conjuring elephant who had been the star attraction of a traveling circus that had fallen on hard times, decided to entertain all that remained. He was the lone survivor of the mysterious catastrophe that had befallen the city. The animal told jokes, did headstands, and carried on a practiced ringside banter across 15 of the abandoned city's 23 official languages. Nobody heard the elephant, but that is besides the point. It is, however, said that solitary lampposts were so entranced by the demonstrations of memory, reasoning, juggling, and calculation so adroitly performed by the elephant that they lit up of their own accord. Traffic islands blossomed when they witnessed its acrobatic feats, and pavements that had always been askew found new sympathetic alignments. A door that had been forever padlocked in a warehouse suddenly found itself ajar. There were many other minor miracles that went unreported. In this way, the elephant was able to momentarily transmit and transfer its generous sentience to a metropolis that had become as barren of consciousness as the moon is of life. And so, that which appeared lifeless was quickened into animation. The elephant found enlightenment within its grasp, in that limbo between appearance and essence. But its innate compassion prevented it from leaving the city to its mute posterity. And so the magnificent beast left its shadow on a wall. The city fell asleep again, dreaming that an elephant had come to entertain. So from an elephant, let me go now quickly to a sparrow. And again, I am reading a very short poem by Risham's dad, Najam Hussain Sayyid. The country of the sparrow, the same earth-colored sparrow as we have back home, with the same trembling as it picks through the fallen and the crumbling. What is our sparrow doing here in this American town? I find this poem particularly poignant at a time when we are unable to travel. So here is this man, a poet, thinking about a sparrow somewhere else. Shaji, you've never left Lahore. Now that you're traveling, you see a visa stamp on every sparrow's wings. Wherever there is land, there are sparrows too. Among sharper claws and beaks, one has to stake one's life, pick through the falling crumbs. I think that gives us an understanding of what is valuable, of the things that become rare, of the things that become precious, of the things that we ordinarily take for granted and which become extraordinary in these strange times. I'll stop here.
I will just take a few minutes just to kind of bring in some discussions that we have been having on image and value in our studio. And one of the, Harun Farooqi in a, Rohini and Pallavi, thanks for it, but and the image that you start with initially of a drone image of an empty street in San Francisco, and this whole meditation on what is the status of this image. Harun Farooqi, the important documentarist and artist who was in Berlin for a long time, passed away a few years back, made a very interesting intellectual proposition about an image and made a separation between what he called a kind of a subjective image which needed an eye, needed a touch, and which could be argued to a subjective point, and a phantom image, the image that is produced by a machinic logic, which does not need that subjective eye, which is just mobile, moving, catching grass image, could on a barrenness of a landscape, on a desert in the Gulf War, he mentions it brilliantly, on a desert where there is almost, you just see desert and the image is moving over it. So it does away with the immediate subjective. You can do a later on an analysis of that image. But what is interesting now is that we have landed inside a phantom image, because all that the image that is produced. So is it, I'm not at all unhappy of landing inside of phantom image, because that's the contemporary soup that we have all in, where the separation between that subjective eye and the image that envelops you, of which you have to make sense, are running over each other. And the second point that is connected to this is, and that is connected to the question of value fundamentally in the long run and in the short run too, would be this transformation from the snapshot to the screenshot. Now, the snapshot had a destabilizing puncture to the art world, to the art, the idea of art. And it is still art is haunted by the snapshot, the ability to produce an image, claim a subjective signature, and that ease of it. And still it stays uncertain within artistic discourse. But now we are moving to a screenshot, which is that where the screenshots start determining the moment, the non-replicable moment, like this moment is non-replicable. There's the chat on the side, the image, the specific location. So this production of the screenshot as a site in which everybody makes a claim to the non-replicable moment. So the decisive moment is now the non-replicable moment and the snapshot. So what does it do to the question of value? So that means we are all inside artworks, like we are inside the phantom image. And we are also part of the screenshot artwork of many. So it's a kind of a soup bowl in which the world has to rediscover its relationship. I just want to end with, because I saw Prasad and Rupali and I was at a story we share between each other. We went to forest, we used to go to forest, which stopped because of many crime. And in the forest, we once saw a tiger kill a very beautiful big buffalo. We went there. It was quite late in the night and we were taken there. There was a rumor that the tiger has killed. And it was complete midnight, complete dark. And then there was torches and the tiger, the buffalo was lying there very serene. And if we waited, we could have seen the tiger pull the buffalo into the deeper forest. But believe me, the hands were frozen, we were shivering. The scent of the forest enveloped us. It's fearful, it is shivering, but it was incredibly beautiful, where the touch of something that one cannot even allow to fall once had to be imagined and thought. That's the fundamental unseen. That also is what the world of touch continuously produces for us. So that these are the three elements that I want to bring to the thinking around this question of continuous question of what happens to the work when touch is withdrawn, because artists are supposed to have touched the work, that's why it's an artwork. And when the touch is no longer just a simple touch, it becomes a relayed series of touches, then how do we think of art? And now with the NFTs, we are in a different realm. Our big competition of art will not be snapshot, but NFTs, and business as usual may be the way to go for many people, but I think we have fundamentally changed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those wonderful sort of thoughts. And it's actually interesting because Sandeep spoke about vision and touch actually becoming one, and here there's sort of this contest between vision and touch that plays out in your propositions. So it's kind of interesting to move between the two, I think. Yeah, and actually, taking the cue from the story about the tiger, we would also now like to go to Prasad and Rupali, who join us from Bombay. And Rupali and Prasad, your work sort of observes sort of the negotiations between agents and structures within an urban landscape, right? The spaces they evoke through sculpture, pedagogy, etc., sort of folds and interruptions in a sometimes chaotic, but also very sort of determined and also structured urban landscape. So one is curious now with the arrival of new logics of structuring urban spaces, right, which are driven by medical protocols, or reformulation of social interactions based on viral counts and patterns, hotspots, as one calls them. How are these sort of, agents, and how are these sort of flows, right, restaging their intervention in the urban? What is your assessment now of this sort of changed urban landscape?
Thanks, Pallavi. Thanks, Rohini. After the plague and the whole the urban form changed in many cities across the world, actually. So you had these wider roads and you had these kind of clear boundaries and all of those things, and health and pollution, health, sanitation, they became kind of discourses around which planning and urban form kind of were set up. This pandemic has all done weird things. Actually, we also run a school of architecture. So what we've been doing since last May March 17th was when the lockdown happened in Bombay. March 21st is when it happened across the country. So, so, so since then, we've been putting together something called the COVID glossary, which kind of which is a set of stories, practices, engagements, negotiations of people at the school. So there are 200 of us kind of putting together this glossary, and it will be opened this March 17th, on next Wednesday. And many things have emerged from there, to look to which hints at what is transforming and what will stay and stuff like that. One thing is very clear. I mean, the fragility of institutions, no, in like for example, the University of Bombay had to conduct exams. So Devesh in the beginning, was speaking about nurseries being conducted in Zoom. But here, when you have to conduct an exam, the University of Bombay says that you need two cameras, one looking at you and one on the table, and one with three of you, the table and the camera, and one in the entire room. So that assembly is a transactional object. It's an assembly of cameras which puts together a space to transact with this kind of strange, awkward situation. So the transactional objects that is are not static. They keep on evolving. They keep on changing, and then they will keep on kind of For example, this one is a shop. There are lots of these shops on one pole in the city. They're carried in on one pole. So we thought we'll make a shop with 3 points touching the ground. So they have to pay only rent for those 3 points, when they kind of move. So that was how this work came up. But basically, what's happening is there is a spatio-temporal reconfiguration that has happened. Like for example, right now I'm sitting since 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting till now. It's this place. So complete spatio-temporal reconfiguration. There are lots of possibilities in this. For example, today, Project 88 doesn't have to do this opening. Both of you all could have done it. So that collapse could have happened. Actually, you don't need these institutions. So that is what has happened also. And there are new terrains of transactions which have emerged in this spatio-temporal reconfiguration. Now, and those terrains we don't know, because the cartographies that we are familiar with, those cartographies are unable to map those terrains. Change time, constant, the whole aspect of being in different multiple spaces at the same time, and all of those things. And all of them have yielded transactional forms. For example, so there are restaurants now which have kind of which have shrunk into just a ATM, just a shop front. So they don't make people sit. They just kind of deliver, and that becomes the restaurant. So transactional form has kind of evolved with the pandemic, and it will kind of what is happening is there are certain logistical efficiencies that have emerged in the process. For example, sitting at home and doing your courses and lectures and all of this thing. So many offices have shrunk. Architectural offices have shut completely. Many of them work from home and stuff like that. Now, these logistical efficiencies, I mean, they're fine, but somehow they do not overlap with the rhythms of the everyday. Otherwise, which like I'm not able to completely kind of work with this efficiency. We are saving money because we are kind of we don't have to run the infrastructure of the school. We are saving money in everybody's transport. We are saving money in multiple ways and stuff like that. But somehow that logistical efficiency uh, is not able to, it's creating this very awkward adjustments, for us. So the whole thing that uh, unable to kind of come to terms with this logistical efficiency. So that has happened, and I don't know. So whereas the transactional objects have changed, urban form has kind of changed, and planning will take it up very quickly. And I think our glossary will be able to kind of sketch some map out of what will be the emerging form. But at the same time, for us, uh, uh, that those shifts, no, those shifts of in space and time, that we're unable to handle and come to terms with, actually, just unable to handle that. So that's what. Rupal, you want to add something? Very mute.
Yeah, just to kind of add to this, to the fact that the transactional objects in many ways, like for the way we sort of think about them, drawing from the urban realm, which we're very interested in, is that they're incremental, sporadic, and in some ways you cannot pin them down. You cannot see them through through empirical logics. And so in that sense, there's a kind of agility, and that's something that's seen in the COVID glossary that we've sort of been putting together with 200 students, bringing in their own experiences of how, in some ways, humanity, through its agilities, through its fragilities, has been coping with things. And I think the second point that I also want to kind of bring is that one of the things that is important to also understand is that transactional objects are, in some ways, this kind of in this liminal space between the utilitarian and the absurd, and I think that absurdity is something that is interesting. There are trips and kicks through which they operate, and in doing that, they do not fall very neatly into questions of power structures or or resistances. But in some ways, in the kind of logic that they operate, and they almost frustrate the coordinates of power and sort of capital and other things. So I think that is interesting for us to look at, because resistance can easily be subverted. You have techno-legal frames through which we operate, we resist things, but those can easily be taken over. Now, how do you start looking at things, objects, transactional objects, capacities that in some ways are able to almost bypass some of those logics, and in that sense, be able to sort of operate on a very different realm or different plane. So yeah.
So for example, so now we have furniture makers who make exam tables for Bombay University. So with 4 cameras attached to it.
That's crazy.
Wow, that is crazy. Thank you so much, Rupali and Prasad, for that incredibly detailed and amazing sort of reading of the changing landscape of the urban. I'd like to move to a slightly different register of time and space now and invite Shumon to join us from Dhaka. Shumon, in your work, we see another modality of traversing the world, particularly at those moments at which time congeals around objects. We'd like you to speak a little bit about this.
Thank you, Rohini. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for your question, and it's been extremely exciting to be in this space. Seeing everybody here. I mean, I'm actually seeing for the first time in a platform. It speaks of a kind of an energy we all share together, right? And what a world we live in at the moment. We live in a world where so much has changed. Time has changed, right? Our perception of reality has changed. The way we deal with reality, the way we deal with time, the way we interact with each other has changed. And we've lost so much. We gained also a lot, I think. So coming to your question, for me, time is is already past. Time is gone. Time is born. Time is it's kind of a poetry in a way. So when I was there standing in front of those gigantic, ships, they were for me a vessel carrying time, symbol of time itself, uh, and uh, and I was thinking about their journey in terms of poetry. So I write poetry, and I would like to share some of my poems. I mean, I'd like to basically take this opportunity to share two of my poems that I've written, though part of another project. But this resonates what your question, the question you've asked me about, about time and space, if I may. You are not of this planet, of this distant space, where you drift along shore, where you get lost in you the mirror. You are from a distant time of a secret kiss, longing to pull me back again to your flame. You are me, I you. We are like two shells floating on the sea for eternity too. And then the sea has memory. Passing through her floating waves, the sea remembers. When you walk in, a story of your journey paints a lasting mark on her skin. The sea has memory of infinite sky, of all the forgotten longings. So that's it all I have to say, basically.
Oh, thank you so much. That was so evocative. And in fact, coming from what you're talking about with reference to memory, another order of observation of time, memory, and all of these things is also realized in work of Mahesh Baliga, who is joining us today from Kolkata. And in the show, we have a work of his which is called The Sea in the Dusk. Sabiha, maybe we can just pull that up quickly. Mahesh has described the work as a quiet meditation on color and the sea and the history of both.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Rohini and Pallavi and Project 88 and Shri. Actually, this work started, like there was a work which I made earlier. It was on sea when I lost my mother, and like as a painter, you think of what are the possibilities of exploring yourself and about superimposing something which you emotionally touched with when you read a newspaper story of a small baby is on the seashore when people were migrating from I think Turkey or somewhere. I forgot the context, but I remember the image. But somehow I wanted to get that superimposition of the emotion of mine and something what I felt about the image, but I didn't want to put the like a baby image or anything there, but get that sense of I'm not telling it's a pain, but kind of loss. So maybe the sea losing its color or something like that. I'm not sure about exactly how I feel, but that was the context when I painted this. But with the lockdown and everything, the whole way, like this was the only painting at my home when I was in lockdown, and I was thinking of changing it to white or changing it to different ways of it. But I think the wall became an space of imagination in the lockdown, and remembering all that you could have done right in your past, something like that. And I think it's a new way of not learning that we never thought of, that like even sending email, like seeing a show in online which I am not comfortable, or meeting friends in Zoom which I am not. I just want to meet them, I just hug them, that's all. So I think I'm that kind of person who would like to get everything and hope everything into normal. That's what I feel.
Thank you so much, Mahesh. We're so glad. Yeah, we all agree. Absolutely. So from Mahesh, we're going to take this relay of color and texture forward with the work of Gautam Ghosh. And Gautam is joining us from Shantiniketan. And Gautam, for you, the question was that, today there are all these efforts to understand the pandemic, not just as a medical or sociological phenomenon, but also as an interconnected geological moment. So since your work, you've described it as a mythopoetic exploration of geology, could you talk a little bit about the relationships between ethics and geology? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rohini, Pallavi, and Sri for the amazing event, and really, I'm get opportunity to meet everybody who represented by Project 88, and yeah, it's a great energy. Thank you, and excuse me for my corrupt gestures. I was recovering from sleepless night, so yeah. Ethics and geology. Yeah, I was trying to remember how ethics and geology can goes. Yeah, we know about ethics, but how it can relate it to geology. Actually, geology itself, the discipline of geology, is not more than maybe 300 years, maybe less than 300 years. It has a history. Maybe another next 300 years, there will be something else replaced by geology. So it's a like small spectrum of time when we talk about the geology. But what is continue? I think that is ethics. Something is continue from the beginning till now. Maybe it will also continue till future. But now within this 300 or 400 years of when we are celebrating discipline geology and how it is ethics, geology as a discipline that is celebrating by various disciplines as academic scientists, also industrialists who are working with like energy, renewable energy resources, and also where I'm working in Kutch in Bhuj in Gujarat. Uh, Part of the landscape was occupied by border security force. So they also have a different concern about this landscape and geology. And eventually, three of them are equally a sculptor position, and they also wants to shape the landscape various different way. And I was in a seminar 1 year back in Bhuj, and that seminar took place in the Kutch University in the Department of Geology. And I think I was quite fortunate to witness those battle. I would say battle because there is a representative body from the industry, and there is a Department of Geology, and they are invited speaker, and also there is a representative body from the border security force. And I think it's really mesmerized to see them how they are having a dialogue. They have a common language to speak, but in the end of the day, they just stick to these resources. I guess they're fighting for it, and academic scientist has a different take, and industrialist has a different interest and different take, and border security force has a different interest and take. And there was a conflict, and then the chairperson or the moderator had to come up on the stage and just cleared with a two statement. The one statement he said that maybe there are some things we can do for this land and landscape, maybe good for the economy, but maybe this is not good for the future planet or future earth. And if we conduct certain serious research, that may be going to help for our future planet or future Earth, but not good for the immediate economy. So this is the two precise segments he has mentioned and raptured the entire event. Then there is another incident, that is the pilgrims, and there's quite a vast landscape that pilgrims walks to this Haji Pir Dargah, and on the way they dropped their like plastic bottles, polythene bags, teared a piece of tobacco, and this mazar, that's fair, the Haji Pir fair goes for a month. So imagine this for a month, and thousands and thousands of pilgrims goes and come back and leaving their marks. And on the contrary, this Bunny grassland is a very fertile ground for many, like reptiles, mammals, and migratory bird. They come, they live, they use the land, and the human come and they also use the particular way they use the land. So I don't know. That is something maybe geology and ethics. What we are doing, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gautam. That was really, really an interesting way of unpacking the two things. From ethics and geology to cooking the people we like. Sarnath Banerjee joins us from Delhi. And Sarnath, your work uses the intersection of humor and everyday life as both points of departure and arrival. So particularly over the last year where, ideas of affliction, transmission, and travel have been put into play, how do you see the relationship between humor and nostalgia, especially in the wake of the pandemic?
Can't seem to unmute. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I was here all through. Rohini, can you just repeat the question once?
Yes, absolutely. Basically, just looking at actually how you use humor, and given everything that we've been through in the past year, where ideas of affliction, transmission, and travel, everything has been put into play, and your work looks at humor and also everyday life as points of arrival and departure. So with reference to the work that we've used, of course, in the show, but also more broadly, you described very simple, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, I've forgotten the word. My brain is, anyway. But you said something very interesting about your own articulation of your problem with nostalgia. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit to that, about humor and nostalgia and where you place them within the practice.
With reference to this work?
In general, or with reference to this work?
Yeah. So I actually haven't clearly articulated what nostalgia means to me. I'm extremely uncomfortable with that word. History, all right, but nostalgia, kind of a photoshopped idea of history that suits one's current whims and something like that, and therefore like sort of weaponized, instrumentalized for various reasons, and therefore like sort of the root of conservative. I live in like Munim. I also live in Germany, and these are all sort of it's a worrying subject, and nostalgia is indeed a worrying subject. So, I mean, I don't really the anxiety, because I think currently, as we've seen with the work of a lot of my fellow artists at Project 88, that they have addressed the fact that there are a lot of anxieties around what's going on. The government has effectively made us ballerinas. We are always on our toes. And just like, you kind of, if you worked in a television company, you know that you're just given some task to continuously do something to kind of keep yourself distracted, And this sort of heavy compliance, this sort of extreme compliance. I even have a character called Murari who's got a smile. People go to a psychiatrist to kind of basically, when they're depressed, and this guy has a smile of absolute surrender, So he's adjusted himself to the point that he can't really, he has to like sort of every good things and good and great things are like falling apart next to him, disappearing, ways of living, buildings falling apart, environment, etc., etc. Now so the very kind Tasneem Mehta, who's hidden today, but she's here, I know, gave me, Rohini, you also did something there. Several other artists also worked at Bhavdajilat, and I got like interested in the idea of radio. I wanted to write these sort of radio comics, and I wanted to put some lazymations, which are like basically lazy people's animation. And I wanted to work with the idea of the occult. I mean, not the occult. Occult is a different thing, but the otherworldly. So basically something that the sanguine Indian middle class can keep everything in control, but like body odor, it sort of breaks out through expensive perfume, like the whole Japanese idea of the woman in the well, and some of the most interesting political commentary in our future would be done by ghosts or spirits or whatever the idea of the German idea of the Geist. So I got anyway, like a Bengali boy, any self-respecting Bengali boy would love ghost stories, except my son, but he's half only. So I sort of started working on this these series of it's called Spectral Times. It is basically a fact checker whose work is redundant because nobody really cares much about fact checker, and who goes and interviews people, and it's like Phool Khile Hai Gulshan a little bit like, but he's a dark tabassum, meaning it's about like people who talk about their sort of dark experience. And this is a man who had quit smoking and suddenly developed a great appetite for things, everything he wanted to eat. And then one fine Saturday afternoon, in a very sort of quiet corner in a airport lounge, possibly in Bangalore, he looks at this sort of family, a reasonably well-fed, good garden variety North Indian family. And he looked at, and the head of the family looked at him weirdly, and being a decent man, he sort of moved away. And then later on, when he was waiting in the queue to kind of get on the plane, everybody else looked at him as if like he's some kind of other. He's kind of feeling, he looked at himself in the mirror. And also he realized that there's nothing wrong with his face. And then halfway up in the flight, he realizes the problem is that he really wanted to eat all of them up. So he went through the whole process of like going to friends. Friends is that way. It's not nothing special. It's vorarophilia, where you want to eat up a person. You want to be a part of it could be loneliness. You want to be a part of a greater whole. It could be a sense of being part of something greater. It's a sense of way of preservation. You eat up your grandparents so that, they are muscle memory that happens somewhere in Pacific Island, somewhere. In Covent Garden, cooked flesh was of prisoners were thrown out. In Syria, during the Crusade times, a whole town was eaten up by the Crusaders, a town called Mara. And I'm making this up, as feast. So eating was very much part of history. That's what he's told. So people try to normalize everything around him. And then somebody says vitamin D deficiency, perhaps. And then finally, after like a good vegetarian lunch at Swati in Bombay, he lights up a cigarette, which is decided to stop. And he realizes one of the ways of getting out of this situation is to write a cookbook, not for friends, but of friends. Sort of looking and eroticizing friends to the point that you want to kind of cook them and chop them up. So yeah, urban anxiety, all these things kind of fit into the work. But and I did a whole series of about 7 or 8 of them, and then I stopped. That's it.
Hannibal Lecter says it. No, I'm having a friend for dinner.
Oh yeah, he said it. Yes. Thanks, Pallavi.
That was. Thank you so much, Sarnath. And now from that, we are going to go to Baptist. Baptist, thank you so much for joining us from Mumbai. And your work looks at masculinity, but within the archives. So archives of a different kind completely. But in the last year, we've seen a rise of nationalism of a certain kind in the wake of the pandemic. Vaccine nationalism, movements of people across borders, etc. So in this context, picking up from the idea of memory, which has come across several people's practice, do you see memory as a kind of sedimentation in the way that we might imagine geological sedimentation, or as something that requires constant reconjuring outside the public eye?
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I'm sorry, but my connection is very weak, so it keeps dropping. The video keeps dropping. So I'm just going to try and be very brief because I don't know when I will lose the connection. So just bear with me. Thanks a lot for the question, and thanks to Pallavi and Shri. And it's lovely to see you all over here. It's almost surreal to see everyone from different parts Yeah. So yeah, talking about this particular work and memory and sedimentation, and there are lots of it's a very packed question, and even the overriding question of this masculinity is something which I want to also sort of address, because it's a word that somehow has never sort of existed for me from a from the very start. I think I was always sort of sort of fight it or deconstruct it and to tease it out and to have it to sort of almost make it obsolete sometimes. And I think in the current scenario that we are in, uh, because of social media, everyone has a voice, and it's very interesting to see how this particular term is now being, has been taken and made into something else, and is getting different forms that sometimes we wouldn't understand or accept, but today they're kind of accepted or whatever, what have you. Bringing that in, looking at this particular work that you see now, the ribbons work, it was interesting as when I was doing this research on the Siachen glaciers, almost spanning 13 years now. In the start, it was very interesting when I was meeting people from porters to soldiers. There was always this they always wanted to highlight the fact that they have won an award for something, or they were recognized for something that they had done. And what was very interesting is sometimes I met even people saying that, oh, that person didn't deserve it, but this was the scenario, and this is exactly what happened, and this is something that shouldn't have been given to this person, etc. And it was always this question about what does it mean to be awarded, and especially in the context of the context of the army, the military, because it's like a paradox, because there's always this kind of part which is lost and which is gained, and it always sort of makes me struggle with the fact that a certain award has been awarded, but then at what cost, and sometimes at what loss, because there's always two sides to the coin. And so when I was doing this particular work, I was trying to sort of tease out a lot of these used clothes by soldiers, etc. Because it was a terrain that I could not practically get to. Then how do I bring that geology into this particular comfortable situation that we are in at the moment? I mean, comfortable as comfort can be. Was trying to look at these scars basically that this geography has left on these particular garments, and to see that how if you look at it very closely, you can see a lot of stitching and mending that was done by soldiers themselves, and it's something where it was sometimes done not just because to mend, but also to keep the fingers warm, because at -60 you're basically trying to cope with this extreme cold temperatures, and how do you do it? So there were various mechanisms they were using to sort of cope with with the cold. And so this, what you see is like a ribbon, which is basically these geometrical forms, and these geometrical forms, each form defines an award, and they're basically defined by the Indian government. If you see some of the lines that go into a triangle, it's basically a recognition that you've done the Siachen posting. And it was very interesting for me to look at geometry playing in this particular design, and how geometry has always been something that has always played part in army warfare and in making fortresses and planning architectural plans. And it was very interesting to reduce all the efforts, or all the kind of the sacrifices, or the attacks and everything, into this, reducing into this very minimal geometrical form, was something I was trying to also sort of address within the work. And yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question, but just bear with me. Sometimes I can see myself. Okay. I hope that addresses some things, or I took it somewhere else. I don't know.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we wanted to start with Munim, but maybe it's a good idea to now come back to Munim and actually end with Munim. Really, in the light of everything that's been said, I think it becomes interesting now to make the final return, as it were, to the idea of nostalgia. And Munim, I think the question to you that we had imagined was that, how do you actually sort of negotiate this idea of nostalgia in your work? Because obviously, like Baptist spoke about sedimentation in a different register though, but what we're facing in a way today is also sort of, a form of sedimented violence, right? Within to the environment, within societies and all of this. in the light of this, like the question I suppose to you is that, is it possible to be nostalgic? Is nostalgia even possible? Or I mean, how do you sort of deal with that in your practice, in your work?
Yeah, thanks, Pallavi and Rohini, and sorry for disappearing in the beginning. Something happened. And thanks to Sri and everyone in Project 88 and all of you. It was lovely to hear all these stories. I will actually say that, when we were in endless lockdown in Dhaka, I was reading and listening to this Argentinian writer called Jorge Luis Borges. And he was talking about this blindness and what he see and what he imagined when he was getting blind or in between of those spaces. And I was thinking, as we can travel at that period, I was thinking if we can really imagine a world beyond our physical movement, and think about the future and the present and how it changes our perception about light and darkness, real and unreal, past and present, and how our sense get activated when we accept the idea of blindness, both literally and philosophically. It just open up a new world in front of us. And I was walking for a long time about seeds and the seeds which have disappeared for various kind of interventions in our part of the world. And while I was talking with the farmers, I realized that when they think about the farming and ecology, they also think about a lot of beings which we don't see as energies. Either it's light, it's air, or different sort of existence. And I think when we think about past, especially at the time of the pandemic, I think it gave us a chance, a pause to really rethink, recalibrate, reconfigure our relationship with the earth, and also how we think about the future. So I think when we think about nostalgia, we also think about present, we also think about future. And I think I'm also reconfiguring and recalibrating my ideas. I can't give you any direct answer how I deal with nostalgia. I don't know if that works.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, this obviously discomfort with the idea of nostalgia, Sana sort of tried to articulate, and then you're dealing, I think, with nostalgia in this sort of experiential way as well. So yeah, I think it's been actually a very interesting set of responses and articulations. And I if there are any questions, actually, I think we have some time to take questions. Are there any questions in the chat already? So yeah, I mean, if there are questions from the panel, yes, Rohit has a question. Please go ahead.
Oh yeah, thank you so much, Rohini and Pallavi and Sri and all of you, sort of artists with Project 88 for doing this. It's really compelled me to think a lot. What I wanted to ask was about the question of precisely nostalgia that I think runs through a lot of the discussion that's taken place. To what extent is nostalgia like a pleonasm, like a redundancy, right? What are we nostalgic for, right? Is it a normal that existed before? And this is, I think, the call of the exhibit as well. Is it a normal that existed before the time of pandemic and this latest crisis? Or are we just always nostalgic for yet another catastrophe that happened before? So the question is, I suppose, is nostalgia even like a possibility? Is memory a possibility? Like, what are we memorializing? I mean, it seems like in what we've gone through is from sort of scientific modernity and the onset of capitalism onward, it's just sort of an upward and downward of just crisis and booms and busts, right? And so all we can do is be sort of nostalgic for, I guess, a boom, but we also have to be nostalgic for the bust that is going to come with the boom. And so I don't really understand even the sort of question of memory or nostalgia with respect to the production of art. I do also understand like the perspective of sort of producing a sort of utopian, sort of communist future will no longer need to be nostalgic. But what I want to suggest is that that are we able to think aesthetically about producing something, about making art, about making thought that is not beholden to going back to something that will correct what is happening in the present, nor are we to think as artists, as thinkers of a utopian future that will correct everything that's wrong with the present. So how do we even think of time if nostalgia and memory is not even a possibility in some sense?
Would anyone like to take that? I feel like Pallavi and I have asked lots of questions, but would anyone like to take that or comment?
I just put something in the comments, but I've got to go in 2 minutes, but I just can read it in relation to Rohit's point. Is that all right?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this thing called nostalgia, and in relation to a sense of like, is it because I'm very much from analog time in my relationship to media and feeling, or is it because of something to do with, the adjectives, annoying adjectives that are used by people when they talk about, when they destroy terms like creativity and call themselves creatives, or destroy terms like being influential and, call themselves influencers. I think I get constantly disturbed by the present in a way that there's a sense of it being, the future being literally just eviscerated. Mark Fisher writes about this as the slow cancellation of the future, and of course he, goes into it much, into this strange feeling I describe in depth. But I would articulate this feeling more in a sense of, as a sense of mourning and grief, as opposed to nostalgia. Which has now, in a way, also been kind of flattened into a ridiculous thing called vintage. I mean, one must be aware of these ridiculous terms and these ridiculous ways that people are thinking aesthetically around these, around this. I refuse to think of the 80s as vintage. So, against this flattening of feeling, one is, I prefer to think about this as a kind of space of grieving, because I think to attach feeling to something that people already think of as vintage in relation perhaps to, I don't know, adding kind of some Kodak filtering on a film, or putting a bit of like, filtering, whatever, in order to make something appear as if it's from the 80s. This kind of machinic phantom filter on the subjective eye, maybe. I think I think the term nostalgia is a little bit, it's not very useful. I think nostalgia comes with a sense of romance and melancholy. I think a lot of the complexity of these feelings have like disappeared from the world in some way, which makes me want to grieve. But I'm not sure I think I just maybe use this opportunity to say thanks, and I think Kojo and I have to split. But
thanks, Anjali and Kojo. It was lovely having you.
It was a great pleasure.
Thank you.
It's great to see all the Project 88ers. It's not that there's 88 of us, but in my mind there's 88 of us all. So it was a pleasure, Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Lovely to see you all. Bye.
Yeah, are there any other questions or responses to
Anyone? Yeah.
Any other?
I had one response to Rohit. I think it's a very interesting question. I was reading this book, Law of Force.
Divesh, can we see you now, please? Can we come out of the green fog?
Impact.
And can I just interject? This is Neha speaking. Interject just to say that it's not just merely grief. We're robbed of the future. There's thievery involved. Anyway, that's just an aside. Go on, Jimesh.
No, this law of force. So there is an interesting kind of argument that
we
Thomas...
still can't see you, Jeepish.
Okay, I will take off my...
Reluctantly, you will come on camera.
Yeah, then reluctantly. So there is an argument that Thomas Bloom Hansen makes, which is interesting, that the production of a group, idea of a group intimacy, like when we say in Bengali, da, like Shridi, this da business, and then bhai, and this, there is this production of a group intimacy that is very much part of a living culture here, which then is weaponized or mobilized. This production of intimacy is based on an idea of some kind of a remembered, shared past, which is a lot of the time is a sentiment that has never been hurt past. So in a sense, this exaggerated hurting of sentiment that is part of our present is based on an idea of an intimacy of a shared past. Now, this intimacy needs nostalgia. So at the very heart of the political project of modernity, it needs to feed an intimacy which then feeds nostalgia, because the abstract citizen never is produced. It is always, however much the pedagogic mission of modernity or state or whatever is, it always fails in that abstract production of the abstract citizen who will. So what he says, there's two things. He says that there is a disavowal of any idea of individual liberty that has to be defended in, especially it's talking about India, that nobody defends individual liberty. They defend only when it is threatened of someone they know or something, but it is not defended as a value to each other. And second is there is an intimacy of this group of sentiment, which then produces a certain kind of past. Now, it is interesting that I find it interesting that politics is produced through this intimacy, this group intimacy, and politics is not produced through just an abstract quotas, and even the Excel sheet politics of AAP needs now this, bhaichara, this bhakti, all these devotional forms are now, they're basically IIT guys who are doing Excel sheet politics, but they need this bhaichara, they need this idea of the affect of intimacy. Now that I think is at the corner of the political community that continuously has to recall this other space, of the non-hurt space, space which is more organic, which is non-hurt, which is always been constructed and reviewed and renewed and thrown away but again. But there is this, and the nature now is also at some level is part of that space. Nature is also been recalled like that. But see, if you look at the geological history, as I'm sure Gautam and everyone, Earth is a very turbulent space. But we recall nature in that kind of, that kind of sentiment of the political community has to recall it like that. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so sort of the artistic political project, in a certain sense, this artistic slash, I totally agree with you, is, and this picks up on what Neha was saying as well, like it's sort of a desentimentalization of nature, of the past, as opposed to what we've seen, which is because sentiment, intimacy can be completely commodified, and we've seen this too, ad infinitum with regards to our contemporary politics, the world around, with regards to populist politics. And what is it? And so, like, I'd ask you just to be greedy, Jibesh, to say more about what does it mean to make something like an unsentimental past?
It's like, see, I don't, it's a very complicated thing about making, and I'm very, so we can say in sports, like if you see in sports, there is always a recall to the past, but never to make it again. So you cannot become a Gavaskar again, because the fire in the belly has changed. The belly has changed, in that sense. So in a sense that you recall, but you not to make it again. So making has a recall, but not to imitate and become
replicate.
Again. Yeah, replicate or become again. This sports, you don't sports the search is never to become that player. It is become another. But you recall it. You recall in the practice of that making, you recall it, but or in the narration of that making. A lot of the time is narration, but you never to become that. So that's why in sports, it's very interesting. The tensions are very interesting, as if you embody that recall, but you are never that. So, and I think its art also is that, but because of the kind of the weapon of the art historical, it becomes more and more difficult.
But it's also important, I suppose, to keep this thing between sort of emotion and sentiment, right? Like the vigilance, one has to be emotionally vigilant, I suppose, because questions of care, questions of all of these can get subsumed in a certain kind of nostalgic or whatever sentimental form. But how to actually at all times extricate them and maintain that distinction, I suppose that's also artistic labor.
It should be. But I think the next round of work in the world will see a lot of that tension. But I think next 10 years will be going to be very, very interesting, because this question of foregrounding, various different new levels of foregrounding has happened. So even the terrain has shifted. So, last 6 months we have been trying to write one essay on photography, one paragraph. We're getting completely confused. It's very difficult to conceptualize it now, because at some level it's very weird to be talking, seeing yourself. You understand? But we have never done that as persons. Even in Skype, it was always the other person was big, but this talking, looking at oneself is in bathroom I used to do, and I used to abuse the world. I used to become a hero, become a Maradona. But like in Zoom, it's like high protocol of presence. You are seeing yourself. But so what does it mean to the photographic image? What is the image that it's very different than the screenshot traveling at a blistering speed? It changes the paradigm. We have to.
And actually you can hide self-view. So it becomes like an act then to actually remove yourself from your own field of vision.
Yeah, it becomes like Gautam said, I want to say, it becomes drama, it's very interesting, which is a very interesting situation. And this will change. See, there was Delhi, there was this gallery, 5-6 galleries opened and showed a lot of work. If you look at it, it looked like we are at an older space-time. And that was the most interesting thing. We were walking, it looked like even Shuddha said, like 2001. And it is not that the works are bad. It's like it's like almost everybody has done the best, but it's like as if you're recovering time, you're switching gear to, and the galleries are trying to recover a moment that is lost. So you're coming back to, doing what you do best in your own imagination. But that point is receded very back. That for the artist, it has gone ahead. So it is an interesting moment. Space-time jitteriness will appear in front of us.
But interesting, because you said we're also inside these phantom images, right? So also we are simultaneously inside of this nostalgia.
Whenever I'm as a Bengali, it's called Jibeda, I know I've been pulled in. That is what I understand now.
But that happens all the time.
Yes, so. That is why am I saying it is happening all the time. That the very idea of the production of the political community the community that you are brought in and brought out is through that mechanism.
I think the also strange thing is that there is this kind of parallel time zones, no? So as you said, some people are inhabiting a time in the past. Some of us we think in the present, but then also there seems to be this sense of, I don't know. So it's a very strange kind of schizophrenic state, because then you wonder whether you've missed the memo, they've missed the memo. It's a strange sort of.
There's no memo.
There's no memo.
There's no memo.
There is no memo. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing, you know, like Huma's work, that there is no line, you know, like in that sense, you know that there is a line, but there is no line, you know, in that it's not even decipherable, it's unintelligible. Fundamentally, it is unintelligible. That's why it is so interesting. This whole idea of intelligibility of modernity, you know, which we have all learned from our training and everything, that you can make the world intelligible. Now you have to make sense of the unintelligibility around it, not through the language of intelligibility. That's why Prasad and Rupali has become very interesting when they work through the language of the glossary, multiplication, you know, like you multiply categories. That's how we will be. That's why it's an interesting group of people here. Everybody's have their own trajectories which are interesting, very productive for us.
Oh, there are no reaction buttons. I wanted to give a reaction. It's fine.
I think Ijaz has posted an article, which if somebody wants to pick that up, Pallavi.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Any comments, thoughts? Okay.
I think you pulled off a 8:30 to 11.
Can I say something?
Sure. Shimon, go ahead.
Can I say something before I go to sleep?
Yes, please, by all means.
No, you know, I have not been able to sleep for the last 2 or 3 days because of this online getting awake. Because you know, I mean, especially here in Bangladesh, you know, I'm sure in the world, but you know, things that we want to do, you know, like constraints are everywhere, you know, like frustration in every places I go. But this opportunity is like so hopeful. You know, we have to do more of these things. You know, we have to get together, share ideas, and you know, talk just silly things, talk about life, talk about, you know, our hopes, you know, dreams and everything. And thank you so much for bringing us all together. And you know, this is amazing. So thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you
for joining.
Thank you to everyone, actually.
Everyone.
You guys are the heroes.
Oh, so sweet. Thank you. So thank you to Sabiha, thank you to Dia, thank you to Project 88, thank you to all of you.
Thanks to Ro, yes.
Thanks to Pallavi. Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you to everybody who's attending. Thank you for putting
You owe us a beer when we meet.
Yeah. Okay. I should have the last word now.
He has a Negroni tucked away somewhere. I think I can. Because the color of the Negroni goes well with her maize dress. So obviously.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, everybody, I think this was.
Pallavi, it was so absolutely amazing. Really enjoyed myself.
Thanks, Ainar. Thanks for coming.
And great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last word to you, Shri.
Yes, Shri wanted to say something.
No, does anybody else want to say anything before I give a vote of thanks? Anybody? All right. Okay, so, well, thank you everybody for joining us. I think there's still a few attendees. This has been a bit of a marathon, actually, kind of a relay race, whatever you want to call it. Like, you know, thank you, Rohini and Pallavi, for making this happen. I know we've been talking about this since, I don't know, July, August, but it's finally happened. And I think it happened at the right time. You know, everything has its time. I think, well, thank you to all the back end, to Sabia and Dia, like you've been fantastic. And I just like to end by saying that, like, I think some great stuff will come out of this for all these talks, and good art takes time. I think Daniel Defoe's book on the London plague, I think, came out 100 years later. Maybe we won't be around 100 years later, but even maybe
I'm going to be here. I don't know what you
but maybe something will come out of this
Somebody.
later, as you know, we'll wait and see what happens.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
that's all. That's what I want to say.
And thank you, Shri, for letting us do whatever we wanted. More or less. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.